pedimos desculpas aí pelo pequeno atraso, houve um pequeno problema aqui com o computador. Sem maiores delongas, eu gostaria de chamar aqui para fazer a apresentação o professor Allan Miller, que é o Dean of Research da Heriot-Watt University, na Escócia. E ele vai fazer uma apresentação, então, fazer uma introdução à Universidade Heriot-Watt. So, Professor Allan Miller, I invite you to come and I'll give you the speech.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think it's afternoon now, but so good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here, to be able to present to you. Apologies, I can't give this talk in Portuguese. That's a little bit limited, very limited. What I'm going to do is give you a talk about Heriot-Watt University, but more than that. Heriot-Watt University is quite unique in many ways, particularly because it doesn't have a city or a region in its title, so nobody knows where Heriot-Watt is. So the first thing I'm going to have to explain is where it is, what it does, etc. So we're delighted to be here with my colleagues who I'll introduce in a minute. Here discussing with this university in particular, but other universities in Brazil, possibilities for research collaboration. We have opportunities for doing joint PhDs and that sort of thing. So we want to present ourselves in that context of opportunities for Brazilian universities working with Scottish universities and Heriot-Watt in particular. So Heriot-Watt, this is a picture of the front door of the campus, and this is a statue of James Watt. And Heriot-Watt, the Watt is James Watt, who I'm sure you've heard of. And it is characteristic of the university because it is engineering driven, the university. That's what we're best known for. But broadening that out into sciences, engineering, into business. So we're a very practical university. We don't have a full scope. We don't do divinity or classics or these sort of subjects, the humanities. We're concentrated on applied subjects in particular. And in that sense, that's what characterizes us. We're also a global university in that we have 5 campuses, and these campuses are in Edinburgh in Scotland. Galashiels and Orkney are also in Scotland, but we now have a campus in Dubai and a campus in Malaysia as well. These are my colleagues that I'm here with today. I'm actually a physicist working in the boundary between physics and engineering in the area of lasers and photonics semiconductors. That's my own background. I'm not going to be talking very much about that today. This talk will be much more general than that. With me is Professor Patrick Corbett, sitting in the 4th row back, and he comes from our Institute of Petroleum Engineering at Heriot-Watt University, where we have a large activity in the petroleum sector. But he's almost coming to the end of 2 years working at the University of Rio de Janeiro, funded by and supported by the BG Group. And we have Patricia Vargas sitting over here, and she is a lecturer at Heriot-Watt University and also the director of the robotics laboratory at Heriot-Watt. So her background is in computer science, and she also has a function in terms of engaging with Brazil because she is Brazilian and did her PhD not far from here, up here, just around the corner in one of the buildings. She was pointing it out to us earlier. And I'm very keen to engage with students here and see how we can collaborate and work together. Okay, so I mentioned the 5 campuses of Heriot-Watt University. If we start in Edinburgh, which is the capital city of Scotland, we have another campus in Orkney, which is a small island way up to the north of Scotland. And that specialises in renewable energy, tidal, wave, etc. There's a lot of research going on in Scotland because we have very rough seas, we have large tides, and it's an opportunity to develop that. So it's one of the world centres in that area. Our Galashiels campus is on the banks of the River Tweed. And if you've heard of tweed clothing, that's where tweed comes from, the word tweed. And there was many manufacturing companies making tweed clothing in the past. Fortunately, no longer. They tend to do specialist clothing now. Most of the manufacturing has gone to the Far East. But the Galashiels College, as it was, is the very first textiles college in the world. It was the very first. We've opened a campus in Dubai, and that's now up to about 3,500 students, and expanding up to around 5,000. And we're just opening a campus in Malaysia in collaboration with the Malaysian government. We have 20 students right now. That's going to expand up to around 5,000 students over the next 3 or 4 years. So it gives us an advantage in some ways of not having a city or a town or a region in our name, because we're genuinely global. We have gone global. What I'm going to be talking about is that global aspect in terms of how we treat our teaching and learning agenda in terms of working with learning partners around the world. And I'll also talk about the research and what we call knowledge exchange agenda, where again we have collaborations around the world. These dots are actually dots that our mathematicians have published joint papers with around the world. And so it's not a reflection of the whole university, but we would note there's no red dots in Brazil, so we need to change that. So, as I've said, Heriot-Watt is a technological and business university. So it's renowned for innovation in science, engineering, technology, design, business, languages. Now, we don't do classical languages. We do, again, practical things like interpreting and translating, etc. But what we address is issues of key world importance. That's really what we're concentrating on. Areas like energy, the environment, manufacturing, and finance. So we've kind of got a little bit away from thinking of subjects, physics, engineering in their own areas, and we've created research institutes which span different subject areas. So if we're looking at energy, we want to bring together physicists, engineers, chemists, even people from subjects like business, management, etc., to bring everything together. So that's our approach. And indeed, the very first principal, that's equivalent to the rector of the university when it got its charter, actually made the statement. He moved from MIT and he saw us as the MIT of Scotland. Whether that's true or not, I'll leave you to decide. This is a picture of a campus, and these are all the academic buildings around here, all around here, etc., sports centre. But this outline here is something significant because that's our research park. And in fact, this research park was the very first science park in Europe when it was created in 1971. Now many universities have got science parks on their campuses. We have around 40 companies on that science park that are there because they want to work with the university. We also are very much involved in entrepreneurial activities. We're very keen for students and postdocs to engage in creating IP and including spin-out companies from our activity. So we train the students in terms of entrepreneurship, introduce them to that, and we run business plan competitions to enhance that, but particularly to build in the training. I'll come back to that. Okay, but I'm not sure how many of you really knew what the status of Scotland was before today, or even where it was. So let me start with talking a little bit about Scotland and where it fits within the UK and Europe. So these are pictures that will typify Scotland. Many people, if they come to as a tourist to Scotland, will be coming because we have beautiful mountainous scenery. We have these, well, what in English would be called lakes, but in Scotland we call them lochs. And very rugged. We've got some of the oldest mountains in the world in Scotland. So it's very rugged countryside, very beautiful. Beautiful beaches, old castles, wildlife, etc. This is a very famous castle. If you saw the latest James Bond movie, this was the castle that was used in the latest of the James Bond movies at the end, where they end up blowing up the old Aston Martin and such like. That was the castle they used. This is a picture of Edinburgh, one of the views of Edinburgh. You see it's a very ancient city with lots of history associated with it. Now, where is Scotland? You might recognise, well, first of all, Europe, and then we have the United Kingdom as part of Europe, and Scotland is the northern part of Europe. It's this bit up here. There's 4 countries within the United Kingdom. There's England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So that's the United Kingdom. Southern Ireland moved off, became independent some time ago, so it's the 4 countries, Northern Ireland here. And Edinburgh, if I can hold this steady enough, is just where that bite is taken out on the right-hand side, and that's the capital city of Scotland. Now, Scotland has a wealth of history, but really this is all you need to know about the history of Scotland. I'll give you it in 3 statements, really. As I said, it's part of the United Kingdom, part of the European Union, and from 1843 to 1707, there was a Kingdom of Scotland. It was an independent country, a sovereign state. Before 1843, it was just a series of clans and kingdoms, etc. But it became unified at that point. But in 1603, there was a union of the crowns between Scotland and England. And this occurred because Mary, Queen of Scots, anybody heard of Mary, Queen of Scots? Very famous person in Scottish history, was a cousin of Elizabeth I, who was the Queen in England. But Elizabeth I, they were cousins, and Elizabeth I didn't have any children. So James VI of Scotland became James I of Scotland and England. So that was the first bit of union. And then the parliaments were united in 1707, and what we term the Westminster Parliament in London became the Parliament of the United Kingdom. However, there's been a pulling away again, because in Scotland in 1998 we had what's called devolution, not independence but devolution, where Scotland re-established a Scottish Parliament. So it's a bit like a state or a region, but we happen to call it a country. And there's all sorts of anomalies. For instance, Scotland still has its own national football team, which is very confusing. And of course, my name Miller means something, I believe, in Brazil, because Charles Miller brought football to Brazil. Well, his father was Scottish, so he considered himself Scottish as well. So there's anomalies like that. We still sometimes act as a separate country for those sort of purposes. Otherwise, we're part of the United Kingdom and part of Europe. Scotland has a long tradition of being quite distinctive. It has its own legal system. It has its own education system, quite different from England. There's a Church of Scotland. We have Scottish pound notes, which are worth exactly the same as the English pound note. And the language is English, except for in the north where people speak Gaelic. So there's not many Gaelic speakers. So Scotland, as part of the UK, had a massive reach. During the days of the British Empire, there was a lot of reach, and the Scots were the ones that went out and pioneered many of the areas like the United States. And so the reason why you have whiskey in the Tennessee mountains in the United States is because it was the Scots that went up to the mountains and started the whiskey. So with a lot of reach out, we've got a lot of traditions in terms of arts, humanities, sciences, etc. And we have a long history as a trading nation with other countries. I like to show this because if you're really interested in hearing about Scotland, this book, written by an American, is entitled How the Scots Invented the Modern World. Now, that seems a little bit boastful, a little bit exaggerated perhaps. And I thought this was about inventors, but it's in fact because the legal system that was developed in Scotland and many of the ideas behind legal and educational systems were exported around the world. And so that's reflected in the fact, so for instance, the Japanese education system is actually a copy of the Scottish education system. The South African one is as well. And I will let you read these statements about Scots, but clearly on the world stage, in the past, we've had a significant impact. Now, much of this came from something called the Enlightenment, that we term it in Scotland, which was a period in the 18th century in Scotland, where there was, as we say, an outpouring of intellectual and scientific accomplishment. So I'm just going to illustrate some of these. In the early days, we had a series of philosophers that really put their mind to developing legal systems, etc. And that was based on empiricism. Okay, it says what it is. Asserts fundamental portions of human reason combined with the rejection of any authority which could not be justified by reason. So that underpins in Scottish law, and these philosophers developed these ideas. There was, I think, 3 or 4 Scots actually were signatories to the American Constitution, for instance, because they had these ideas. Robert Burns is a national poet who's very famous. But then if we move on to the scientists, these were all Scottish scientists during that period. Napier, for Napier logarithms. Gregory invented telescope. James Hutton was the father of modern geology. Lord Kelvin, who I'm sure you've all heard of, except I've cheated here because he was actually born in Northern Ireland but spent most of his life in Scotland. James Clerk Maxwell and Robert Brown of Brownian motion were all Scottish. And then when you come to engineering, James Watt, and of course Heriott-Watt, the Watt in Heriott-Watt is named after James Watt. Telford for canals, McAdam for road surfaces, Meikle for threshing machines, James Naismith for the steam hammer, Fairbairn for the first hulled steamship. And then getting into more modern times, we had Alexander Fleming for penicillin, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, John Logie Baird was the first practical television. We always have arguments with Americans on that because they reckon he invented the television, but no, it was Scotland. William Ramsay for noble gases. And then more recently, the ultrasound scanner, beta blockers, magnetic resonance, and maybe you've heard of Dolly the sheep, were all Scottish inventions. And just in the last year or so, Peter Higgs, who is a professor at Edinburgh University in physics, is of course famous for the Higgs boson. Now, how do we sit then in terms of modern Scotland? Because we've got 3 parliaments. We've got the Scottish Parliament, a UK Parliament, a European Parliament, all 3. One thing that characterises them all is their policy in terms of research, knowledge exchange, commercialisation, because they all see information and knowledge as a driver of the global economy. That's why they invest in research. And there's lots of money over the last 10, 15 years gone into research, increasing research funding. They believe that blue sky research generates IP, so it's not just a matter of doing applied research, it's getting the whole cross-section of research. And international knowledge exchange enhances innovation. That's where we sit. Coming to Brazil is part of that. Engaging with different nations is really important to us for collaborations. So that's common for all of the 3 parliaments. In Scotland, we also have a national academy, and it is called the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I'm part of that national academy as the fellowship secretary, in fact. And it stimulates international engagements in many ways as well, in terms of it will fund two-way exchanges, collaborations, basically raising awareness of Scotland and producing bilateral agreements. Eminent fellows, or past fellows, are people like Charles Darwin, Lord Kelvin, Clerk Maxwell. David Attenborough, of course, he's still alive. He's well known for his nature programs, and I'm sure you've all heard of J.K. Rowling from Edinburgh. Okay, so let me move on now to our university. So I've already said it's a university focused on science, engineering, business and commerce. It was actually created by a conversation between 2 people, between Leonard Horner and Robert Bryson. Leonard Horner was a well-known, famous geologist and educator. And he had a conversation with Robert Bryson, who was a watchmaker. And what Robert Bryson complained to Leonard Horner that the mathematical abilities, but the technical abilities, some of his apprentices were not what he felt should be. Hence, they created a new college, which was the first mechanics institute in the world, and which became a pioneer in access to education for working men and women. And if we roll forward to 1966, it became a university in 1966, which I think is not far off the date of this university as well. So the name comprised George Heriott, who was a financier, and James Watt, the engineer. So it's called Heriot-Watt. I've already mentioned the 5 locations, so I don't need to go into that much more. But you'll see the style of the building. This is clearly a building from the Middle East, so we change the style as we go around the world. And this is actually an artist's impression of the building that's being built right now in Putrajaya, which is the state capital on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So what do we do? I said we actually de-emphasize the discipline boundaries and look for interdisciplinarity to take on challenges that we feel we can apply our research to. So, for instance, we have the School of Engineering and Physical Sciences, which combines physics, chemistry, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, so that they work together collectively on the research. We have a School of Mathematical and Computer Sciences, so we put mathematics, pure and applied together to actually create one school. So again, we can work across these borders, and this is the school that Patricia is a member of. We have the School of Built Environment, which combines everything from civil engineering through architecture into town planning and social sciences. So it goes from engineering to social sciences. We have a School of Life Sciences, which includes biological, environmental sciences, things like food nutrition. We do marine sciences, psychology, nanotoxicology, etc. And then we have the Textiles College that I mentioned in the beginning. It covers textile technology, using new types of fibre, putting light-emitting materials into clothing, all of these kind of technical science, all the way through to fashion and design. And then we have the School of Management and Languages, accountancy, finance, economics, all bundled together, etc. And then we have quite a unique organisation, the Edinburgh Business School, which is operated in a slightly different way because it is totally by distance learning. We have the largest distance learning MBA in the world now. It's a very large organisation, the Edinburgh Business School. And then we have postgraduate institute, the Institute of Petroleum Engineering, that Patrick is a member of, which is Heriot-Watt is associated with this very strongly, our predominance in petroleum engineering. Okay, so let me just give you a quick word on the distinctive international flavour. If you were to come to our campus in Edinburgh, you discover that 33% of our students are actually from outside the UK. We deliver programs to 150 countries worldwide. We operate, as I said, Dubai and Malaysia. We work with 50 universities and college partners around the world, doing Heriot-Watt courses and ultimately degrees. We have around 3,000 independent learners around the world in that sense. And we actually run 28,000 exams every year in 400 locations around the world. So we have a huge spread. And this is where we sit because we have around 8,000 students in Scotland, but the total university is 28,500 students around the world. Already talked about Dubai and I talked about Malaysia. I like showing the building, it's very nice. And we have other international activities, and these are the countries that we're particularly looking at the moment: Brazil, Indonesia, Oman, and China for our latest activities. Okay, I'll go past that. A little bit about teaching and learning, because I know it will be a little bit different here. We have lots of student surveys in the UK where students are asked to judge their own university, and they're built into national league tables, etc. And then the newspapers, Sunday Times, Times, etc., publish league tables. So we come out from these independent surveys, best in the UK for student experience, and fourth in the UK for teaching and excellence, even though we're a relatively small university compared to some. And we excel in some of these areas. The Scottish higher education system, I said, is quite distinctive. We actually have a 4-year honours degree for bachelor's degree, undergraduate, but we also have 5-year enhanced undergraduate degrees if students really want to concentrate on moving into research. So we have quite a distinctive approach to this, with quality assurance and quality enhancement led by some of our agencies. And you might wonder how on earth do we work this system of students all around the world? Well, actually the students in Dubai do exactly the same courses they do in Edinburgh. They take the same exams as we do in Edinburgh. In fact, they take them simultaneously. It was amusing a couple of years ago where we had snow in Edinburgh and we had to close the campus. The snow was so bad. And so there was a notice up in Dubai, exams cancelled because of snow, which was rather unique. But the point is we keep the outcomes and the standards the same, but we have to accept the experience of the students will be very different. They can transfer between different campuses if they want because we do the same courses. And we work very much in a partnership model with the students and have student-led initiatives across the university as well, which you may well have here as well. Okay, let me get on to research then and take you through, just to give you a feel for the research activity in the university. We do work in collaboration with some of the top research institutions around the world. We work at Stanford, we work with MIT, etc. As I said, we've got research-led institutes, interdisciplinary fields of research, and we concentrate on research leadership development. That's a really important agenda for us, to allow all of our young researchers to develop leadership, and also working with industry and entrepreneurship I've already mentioned. So I've mentioned the mathematicians that work around the world, but we've got funded programs. For instance, these are just some examples with China working on 4G wireless mobile communications. We work with Stanford University in a funded program of about over £1 million in photonics, which is my own area, so I get a chance to go to Stanford occasionally. And then the European Union gives us great opportunities for building networks of labs across Europe. So this is an example of a £5 million EU program that we lead in astrochemistry, for instance. So there's many more of them. These are just little examples that I can illustrate. The other mindset within Scotland, because we are a small country of around 5 million population, we realise that it's better to work collectively and together than the different universities competing. So we've created strategic alliances in different subjects. So with Edinburgh University, we have a strategic alliance in engineering and mathematics, where we operate these two subjects as if we're one department spread across 2 universities. I was very much involved in the Scottish Universities Physics Alliance, where all the physics departments work together. We have a common graduate school for all the students. They all meet each other across the subjects. These are all of the subjects we have. And then we have doctorate programs, again, which span across different universities. We have an engineering doctorate program in optics and photonics involving 4 universities. We have a Scottish Doctoral Centre in Condensed Matter Physics, which is 3 universities working together. This manufacturing centre in crystallisation, etc., has 4 universities involved. This social sciences one has about 8 universities involved. So we have different models where we work together. We also work with industry very closely. So we build strategic alliances with the major industry partners. Cells Galileo is a large electronics company in Edinburgh, Renishaw, instrumentation company, BA Systems, build chips, etc. So we build these. Now in the petroleum area, we work with all of the big international petroleum companies. And in particularly here, with Petrobras and the BG Group, etc., in Brazil. So that's very much part of our philosophy. Here's an example of something we do in manufacturing. We've had very big research grants in manufacturing in areas like photonics, digital 3D systems, microsystems. We've brought a lot of money in over the years to that. And in fact, we've just launched another one with 5.6 million grant on laser-based production processes, highly engaged with companies. So we encourage our PhD students to work very closely with companies. Energy, we bundle it all together under the Energy Academy, and Patrick was responsible for setting this up and running it. And I've already talked about petroleum engineering, but within the different schools, we do wave and tidal energy, we do wind energy, we do chemistry of materials, etc., on advanced energy materials. And then in our economics department, they look at the economics of energy. We have solar energy, we do carbon capture. In our school-built environment, we do low-carbon buildings and sustainable buildings, etc. Energy logistics in terms of transport and etc. and CO2. So we try to bring all of these things together under one heading. Also, already mentioned in particular Institute of Petroleum Engineering, that's one of our big areas. It has around £5 billion of contract income from companies. And they work through joint industry projects where they pull together a number of companies to work collectively with the university. They've also been very successful at spinning out companies. These are still some of the spin-out companies. Just to show it's not all highly applied and industry related, we have a physicist, Daniele Faccio, who is looking at black holes in the lab. Now, these aren't real black holes as in outer space. They're analogues of black holes, and what he's working on is some of the theories that Stephen Hawking produced back in the 70s in terms of event horizons on black holes. But nevertheless, the femtosecond laser that he worked with, we also use for applications. So we can go all the way from the fundamental to the applied. Here's just another example, working with the US semiconductor industry using nonlinear optics to look at the integrity of integrated circuits and chips, working with some of the major electronics companies in California and Texas, funded by the US government. Here's a new area we've got into, is that we work on nanotechnology, but there's also a risk of nanotechnology that these particles can actually cause problems for us in the future, for our health, etc. So we have a group that looks at nanotoxicology and nanosafety. So that feeds into policy issues across Europe, etc., in terms of what the risks are of nanomaterials. We also try to bridge between engineering and physical sciences and the life sciences. So we've got a number of projects in this area. For instance, this first one is state-of-the-art microscopy, where we're doing microscopy in 4 dimensions. So in other words, we're looking with huge resolution down to the molecular scale, but we're also time-resolving the movement of these molecules and looking at them in 3 dimensions. We're doing 3D printing of stem cells with the idea that in the future you might be able to create by 3D printing a new liver, a new kidney, etc., and use that as a transplant. We're creating waveguides using femtosecond lasers, very, very fine waveguides and materials, and then we flow blood through these, and then we can separate out embryonic stem cells using this process. So we've got a spin-out company that's doing this sort of thing. Into computer sciences, Patricia's area with intelligent systems, interaction, rigorous systems. This all feeds into something called the Scottish Informatics and Computer Science Alliance, one of these research pools, etc. And Patricia's own area is, she heads up the robotics laboratory with one of our little robots there, one friendly little chap. And what we're very pleased to, at the moment, because we've just had £6 million of investment from the UK government and a joint project with Edinburgh University to develop robotic systems, and particularly in the area of autonomous vehicles and underwater autonomous vehicles. Just something totally different. Again, we have a research group that looks at logistics. In other words, transport, lorries. This group has influenced the number of axles in lorries, because it's a question of how do you distribute the weight of a big truck across the different axles. And they were influential on the UK moving from 2 axles at the back of these trucks to 3 axles, etc. But they also do calculations of carbon usage and for the big companies to minimize both their fuel consumption and the carbon usage as well. We're in Edinburgh as a major financial centre, banks, insurance companies as well, and there's a lot of risk in the banking industry, as we know. And we have a Scottish Financial Risk Academy that works with all of the major financial companies in Scotland as a risk academy. Risk goes much broader than that. I've already mentioned engineering doctorates. We have organisation with the university, I'm sure it's the same here, to develop the technology into products, spin out companies as well. I think I've already mentioned this in terms of entrepreneurship. We have a programme that we run Scotland-wide from Heriot-Watt with a £60,000 top prize. Oops, what have I done? Get back. Messed up. I'm nearly finished. In there, okay. Try avoid the button in the middle. So the success of this is from the various universities in Scotland. People submit projects, we take them through competition, and so far in the last 3 years we've created 22 new companies that have been incorporated so far, and find funding for them to actually develop them into major companies. I'll skip past that. We have quite a unique program that we've invented called the Crucible, where we develop leadership skills within the researchers. Again, Patricia's been involved in these as well, where we involve the students with, take them to the government building in Scotland, get them to know about how policy is developed, how funding is developed, as well as getting them to bridge across different disciplines to build projects which are interdisciplinary projects that would not be created otherwise. So that's really me at the end. We have got a video on our website, and I'm not sure if that's going to work, but is it going to work? Okay. We're just going to give you the view of a student that visited us in Scotland, in fact in Patricia's group, if it works. Just while that's being plugged in, I'll just say that this morning we've signed an agreement between Heriot-Watt University and this university to collaborate in the future in research with student exchanges, staff exchanges, etc. So you may be interested in following that in the future once we get this fully established. And so we're delighted to be associated with this university.
Olá, meu nome é Gustavo Pessim e eu sou aluno de doutorado da USP de São Carlos e eu estou no meu período de doutorado sanduíche aqui na Heriot-Watt University. Então, aqui na universidade, a minha área de pesquisa principal é em robótica inteligente. Tenho trabalhos com enxames robóticos e também alguns trabalhos usando os robôs humanoides, principalmente com o intuito de interação humano-computador ou interação humano-robótica. Uma das coisas mais interessantes dessa oportunidade de estudo no exterior é porque a gente tem muito contato com pessoas de todo mundo. No Brasil, a gente fica relativamente limitado com pessoas do próprio país. O que acontece aqui é que, numa universidade, a gente tem pesquisadores de diversos lugares do mundo e a gente tem colegas de todos os lugares do mundo. Com relação à língua inglesa, eu era um pouco preocupado antes de vir para cá, mas eu tive um ano de estudo de inglês técnico e, em termos de vocabulário técnico, eu não senti dificuldades aqui. A questão do inglês cotidiano, conversas de dia a dia, a gente pega mais com a prática. E a universidade também oferece um curso, que eu fiquei muito feliz, eu não sabia antes de vir para cá, tem o curso grátis de inglês para estrangeiros, o que facilita muito a questão de vocabulário, de conversas cotidianas, e também a ideia de aquela coisa, tipo, quando a gente estuda, às vezes a gente estuda uma forma formal do inglês, e na aula de inglês eles tentam fazer com que a gente fale como nativos. A escolha da Heriot-Watt University para fazer o meu doutorado de sanduíche, ela vem por alguns motivos do tipo, aqui eu tenho recursos de hardware que não teria no Brasil. Outra vantagem de trabalhar no Reino Unido é a questão da língua inglesa. Então, seria um pouco diferente de estar em algum outro país que não fosse inglês, porque, enfim, a gente precisa produzir muita documentação, congressos, conferências, revistas científicas, elas são em inglês. Então, dá para juntar a qualidade do aprendizado da língua inglesa junto com toda a estrutura fantástica das universidades. Eu moro no campus da universidade. O alojamento, ele é alguma coisa que facilita muito a vida de um estrangeiro aqui. Principalmente no meu período, eu vou ficar 1 ano. Então, para diminuir a questão de burocracia, algum apartamento no centro, ou às vezes a gente tem uma série de burocracias do Brasil, de aluguéis e pinta e multa contratual e tal. O alojamento facilita, a gente começa a morar num lugar definitivo mais rápido e a gente não tem esse estresse na saída, mesmo porque o valor também é um valor bem atrativo. A cidade de Edimburgo é uma cidade, para mim, fantástica. Ela junta aspectos de cidades grandes e algumas coisas de cidades pequenas. A paz, a segurança que a gente tem na rua. Mas, por outro lado, a gente também tem lugares muito bons para diversão e lazer. O transporte público aqui é fantástico também. E a gente tem alguns parques naturais ao redor de Edimburgo, então, a alguns minutos, a partir do centro, a gente pode estar em contato com a natureza, mas no centro a gente tem diversas opções de lazer, de festas e coisas do tipo. Então, agrada toda a gama de estudantes, por exemplo. O mais festeiro ao mais mateiro, digamos assim. Com relação aos professores e aos pesquisadores que eu tive contato aqui na universidade, eu fui realmente superou as minhas expectativas. O pessoal é muito receptivo e é muito responsável em termos de aula e em termos de orientação e também a questão de seminários. Os seminários são levados muito a sério. Então, foi uma coisa que realmente superou a minha expectativa. O pessoal diz que talvez seja a Escócia. Alguns países têm fama de ser um pouco mais arrogante e tal, mas aqui eu me sinto realmente em casa. Quando a gente vem fazer o doutorado de sanduíche, a gente não pode passear muito no país, mas a gente pode aproveitar os finais de semana ou alguns feriados que a gente tem. A Escócia é um país magnífico. A gente tem algumas praias, a gente tem informações geológicas super interessantes no norte. E não é um país muito grande, então a gente consegue viajar e conhecer muito no final de semana. Outra coisa, o transporte na Europa é muito barato. Então dá para ir para Londres, dá para ir para a França de formas rápidas e realmente baratas. Esse período de doutorado de sanduíche, aqui na Heriot-Watt University, está sendo um passo muito importante na minha futura carreira como pesquisador. O contato, ou o uso cotidiano da língua inglesa e o contato com os diversos professores, pesquisadores que a gente tem aqui, provavelmente vai ser um grande diferencial no meu futuro e um grande diferencial no futuro de qualquer pessoa que tiver uma experiência parecida com essa.
Okay, I'm surprised they mentioned the beaches there, because the beaches may be beautiful, but you might find them a little cold compared to here. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. We're trying to certainly encourage people to come from Scotland here, and I hope you will be attracted to come to Scotland. I hope you learned a little bit about Scotland, about Edinburgh, about Heriot-Watt, and thank you very much for coming. Sorry. I mentioned the agreement. You were otherwise occupied, but I'll mention it again. We signed, I'll repeat it, we signed an agreement this morning, which is an agreement that we're going to develop both staff exchanges and student exchanges with Heriot-Watt. So we look forward to these things happening. Yes, and perhaps you'll be involved. Okay.
What level of education It's safe. I have a question about the research in partnership with the companies. I mean, what are the main subjects that you work with, and I don't know, how does it work? Does the company comes with a problem and try to solve it, or I don't know.
It's not a specific challenge, but they just want to engage with us to broaden the knowledge range, to know what's happening at the boundaries of the subject, etc. So we do have that kind of engagement with industry and business. Then we have the type of engagement where the companies will actually create a contract where they will contract us to do some research. It's something that they couldn't do, and think that we have the skill to be able to do it. And that's much more direct. That type of research, sometimes there's IP, intellectual property involved with it, so we wouldn't be able to publish it, and we've got to sort all of those things out in advance. But petroleum engineering, for instance, is a good example. You know, working with all the major oil companies, we do actually work in what's called pre-competitive research, where there's common issues that every petroleum company has to solve, if it's offshore or not onshore or whatever, and we can work in a collective way with companies. But then as soon as something becomes more commercial, then they will work in a one-to-one basis with us. So there's a whole range of things. Our manufacturing centre, we work with about 70 companies, and it's all pre-competitive. We publish papers quite openly from the research that's funded from that, because we just want to be part of that knowledge base. Patrick, you probably have a comment.
Well, we'll take Petrobras. Petrobras sent many staff for training and courses to and research to do their PhDs to Heriot-Watt. So I don't know how many, 3 a year, something like that. We had 90 students, so if every company sent 90, we would have a problem. So 3 is probably about right. So there's that training for their staff, because usually Petrobras are hiring people without PhDs, and they have SEMPES, they want to do research. Then, because they don't have the research capability, they bring samples from wherever, and sometimes they will bring them to work in our laboratories, and they get returned back, and it's all very secret and everything. So, you know, we're involved. You know, sometimes they support. You know, so some industry projects have 30 oil companies supporting. So they don't talk about a specific problem on a specific field. They talk about hydrates. You know, how do we get flow from these cold, deep fields? It's a general problem all over the world, right? So they work together, so it's very cooperative. And we have many, many links from big companies all the way down to small SME may say, can you take this measurement for me? You know, a small company with one person, you know, you may be put in a small company with one person to help. I think under SWB you are meant to be doing engagement with companies, and so that's something that you should also ask about, whether people can deliver on that, because I think it's something under SWB that you should have a bit of an internship associated with this. And obviously that's easier where we have research with companies. You don't want to do an internship with Petrobras back here, but maybe we do, I don't know.
Good question. Good question.
A long answer.
A long answer, but it's good. Yeah. This one here.
Well, Heriot-Watt University does a lot of applied research. Actually, I study pure mathematics, and I'd like to know, how does it fit among these applied research? I mean, what's the importance of this pure research and applied among
I try to illustrate that to a certain extent on the slides, because actually I'm a semiconductor physicist, is what I am. And in fact, all of semiconductor physics depends on quantum mechanics. Now, quantum physics to most people is a very esoteric subject. That, you know, it's very mathematical and theoretical, etc. But nevertheless, all of semiconductor physics depends on quantum mechanics. So I see it as a continuum all the way from the fundamental. The guy that's working on the black holes, you know, that's very esoteric. You know, what good is that for society? Well, the challenge that he has is he has to build a new laser system, which he has. He's looking at nonlinear optical interactions in certain materials, and you learn a heck of a lot about that. And then suddenly an idea comes for an application. Now, mathematics itself goes all the way from the very pure to the applied. Certainly areas that we have, like statistics, is very applied. I mean, they can apply themselves to environmental problems, to medical problems, etc. But I think mathematics is one of the most useful degrees to have because it is so applicable to every sphere. Physics, actually, I could describe it as just one big mathematical model. That's what physics is. So everything's physics, yeah. But you could say everything's mathematics on that basis as well. So these kind of core subjects and core discipline, core research is really important to underpin everything else we do in the applied side. And what I say to people in the departments, you know, sometimes people themselves, individuals, like Daniele that illustrated, go all the way from the black holes to applied. But some departments have a balance of people, where some people are doing the very pure and other people are doing the applied, but they talk to each other. I remember previously, for instance, one of my colleagues that was working in laser scattering, sitting down with an astronomer and having a conversation over a cup of coffee in my own physics department. And what came out of that was the fact that the astronomer did something called Monte Carlo calculations of many bodies, and suddenly they realized they could use this for laser scattering to try to go through human tissue, in other words, detect anomalies. And what they're applying it to now is detection of breast cancer. So you take in Monte Carlo of stellar objects, and suddenly you've got an application in something medical. So it's all important. The coffee is really important. People have to. Okay. Any other questions? These are all good questions. Super. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for attending.
Gostaria então de terminar aqui a apresentação, agradecendo a participação de todos e solicitando que aqueles interessados depois entrem em contato com o pessoal das relações internacionais para poder obter maiores informações se for necessário. Tá, ok? Muito obrigado a todos. Obrigado pela presença.